I frankly am distressed over the more recent turn of events in Turkey. I've been jealous for Turkey's success and full of admiration for what it's accomplished. And I hope it's not moving in the other direction now. It looks like freedoms are being curtailed while the ruling party protects its own interest at the expense of others. And that's very distressing to me because the reputation that Turkey did have in the West was certainly improving, and people were full of admiration and so on for it. And now we're wondering what's happening there. You know, how can this happen in a place that we thought was the model?
I know there's been criticism by the government of the Hizmet movement, and I think that is so unfortunate. My experience with the Hizmet movement has been that it is, committed to the most idealistic notions of dialogue and education and social justice, and not at all really political in its orientation. So I find sometimes when, and this is true in the United States as well, when leaders get themselves into political trouble, they look to blame someone. I find that sometimes in this country as well as in other countries, when leaders get themselves into difficulty, they might look for a scapegoat. They might look for someone to blame, and this is very unfortunate.
We see Erdogan using a very benign, very supportive group such as the Hizmet movement as a means of creating fear in the minds of people so that he can enhance his own power. And I don't think it's going to work. On a short-term basis, he may have some success in this, but the Turkish people are smart enough to not be fooled by this type of these types of lies. My statement to the people in Turkey is find out what the Hizmet program is all about. Read the philosophy of Fethullah Gulen and realize where they're coming from. Instead of listening to the politicians describe it, go to the source.
Certainly, it seems to be autocratic. I'm sensing that he's a deeply autocratic person, doesn't want to allow, he's called Hizmet a state within a state, right? Which to me is a strange characterization. Yes, Hizmet is a successful movement with a lot of influence and in that sense does have power in Turkey. Nobody can deny that right now. But, so do many organizations. There are a lot of different organizations. So to me, that's like saying that, again, like the Catholics are a state within a state in America, or the Jews, a state and a state within America. Those kinds of statements are really derogatory. They're pejoratives. We try to avoid saying those kinds of things because Catholics have a right to seek influence in America. Jews have a right to seek influence in America. That's how we operate here. I know in Turkey, people, Turkey is Turkish, and that's also fine. But it is hard for me to understand how that's democracy.
My thoughts about the conflict with respect to the recent tensions in Turkey and the corruption scandal with the AKP movement and party, as well as the sort of allegation that the Hizmet movement has sort of been trying to undermine the AKP, are simply that I think this conflict, to me, demonstrated the consistency and the credibility of the Hizmet movement in the sense of it is not interested in attaining power, it is not interested in political power in Turkey or elsewhere in the world, but it wants to adhere to a certain pro-democratic, pro-liberty and freedom agenda, so that those who are elected to political power not only have a responsibility to provide economic development and to provide education to their people, but at the same time are held to the highest ethical standards of conduct. And I think the Hizmet movement has been consistently asking for that without necessarily asking for anything in return as a pro quid pro in terms of being quiet and then attaining power. And I think that's a positive reflection upon the Hizmet movement.